Hey everyone, welcome back. You ready to dive into some more fascinating tech insights with us today?
Always ready to geek out.
Well, you came to the right place. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something that might just change the way you think about learning to code.
Ooh, laying down the challenge already, I see.
Well, gotta keep things interesting. But seriously, we're looking at this article from Algo Academy. It's called Why Learning Syntax is the Wrong Place to Start in Coding Education.
Okay, I'm listening. Syntax, huh?
Yeah, syntax. And it's something a lot of people think is like the first step when you're learning to code. But this article argues maybe it shouldn't be.
Interesting. I mean, it kind of makes sense. A lot of folks get hung up on syntax right out of the gate.
Exactly. And that can be super discouraging. Like you're trying to learn this whole new language and you're getting bogged down with commas and semicolons before you even know what you're trying to say.
It's like trying to write a novel if you only know the alphabet. You've got the building
Ah,
blocks, but no idea how to use them to tell a story.
perfect analogy. And that's kind of what the article is getting at. It's saying we need to focus on the story part of coding first.
The concepts, the logic, the problem-solving strategies, that's what gives your code meaning and purpose.
Right. And the article says starting with those foundational concepts actually makes the whole learning process smoother.
I can see that.
Yeah,
Instead of getting lost in the weeds of syntax, you're building a mental framework for how code actually works.
exactly. But before we get too deep into that, let's talk about why this whole syntax first approach can be so problematic. What does the article say about that?
Well, imagine you're a total beginner, right? And you're immediately bombarded with all these rules and instructions of a programming language, but you have zero context.
Yeah, I can see how that would be overwhelming. It'd be like trying to assemble a piece of furniture without the instructions. You've got all the parts, but no idea where they go or why.
And the article points out that this confusion can actually make people give up. They hit that wall of complexity and think, nah, coding's not for me.
It's true. Coding can have a bit of a steep learning curve at the beginning. But what's interesting is this article is saying that starting with syntax might actually be making that curve steeper.
Exactly. So what they're advocating for is a concept-first approach,
Hmm.
where you grasp those fundamental building blocks of programming before you get bogged down in the nitty-gritty syntax of a specific language.
Okay, so we're ditching the syntax for now and focusing on concepts. But what kind of concepts are we talking about here? Give me an example.
Sure. One of the most crucial ones is what's called algorithmic thinking. This is the ability to break down a problem into a series of logical steps that a computer can understand.
Ooh, algorithmic thinking. Sounds fancy. Break it down for me a little more. What does that actually look like in practice?
Okay, think of it like this. You're writing a recipe, but instead of cooking instructions, you're writing instructions for a computer to follow. And those instructions need to be super clear and logical.
So it's not about the specific code itself, but about the logic, the step-by-step process behind it.
Right. The article gives this great example of using pseudocode to calculate the average of three numbers. Pseudocode is like a simplified way of expressing the logic of an algorithm without worrying about the specific syntax of a programming language.
I see. So it's like a blueprint for your code focusing on the what before the how.
You got it. And that's the power of focusing on concepts first. You're building up that fundamental understanding that can then be applied to any programming language.
So it's like learning the grammar of a language before you learn specific vocabulary words.
Precisely. Once you understand those core principles, you can pick up any programming language much more easily. The underlying logic is the same.
Okay, this is all making a lot of sense. But if we're not starting with syntax, then what are the key concepts we should focus on mastering first? This article mentions a few, right?
It does. It actually outlines 6 essential building blocks that are like the bedrock of programming, and we'll dive into those right after the break.
Welcome back to the deep dive. It's funny because as we're talking about this whole concept first approach, it's making me realize it's not just about coding?
Oh, absolutely. It's a way of thinking that applies to pretty much anything you want to learn.
Right, like think about learning to play a musical instrument. You wouldn't just jump into trying to play like Mozart, right?
Definitely not.
Mhm.
You got to learn the basics, scales, and chords and all that before you can even think about tackling a concerto.
Exactly. It's like you need to understand the grammar of music before you can start writing your own symphony.
It's about building that foundation, understanding the why before the how.
And this article, it does a really good job of connecting those learning principles to coding education. It's
Ah,
kind of refreshing, actually, to see someone challenging the traditional way of teaching code.
yeah, I agree. especially these days when there are new programming languages popping up all the time.
Seriously, it feels like
Yeah.
there's a new JavaScript framework every week.
Right. So being able to learn and adapt quickly is like the most important skill you can have as a coder.
It's like the article says, you're not just learning to code, you're learning how to learn.
And that's a skill that's valuable in any field, really.
Totally. Okay, but let's dive a little deeper into that. How does learning concepts first actually make you a better problem solver, both in coding and just like in life?
Well, when you understand the fundamental principles behind something, it's like you've got this mental framework for analyzing and solving problems.
So instead of memorizing a bunch of specific solutions, you're developing a way of thinking that helps you approach any problem.
Exactly. You learn to break things down into smaller steps, and you start to see patterns and connections that you might have missed before.
I can totally see how that would be useful, not just in coding, but in like writing or business or even just figuring out how to fix something around the house.
Absolutely. It's about training your brain to think strategically, no matter what the situation is.
So, okay, someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, I'm on board with this concept first approach, but where do I even begin? What would you recommend as a first step?
Well, the article gives some really practical tips. For someone who's totally brand new to coding, they suggest starting with visual programming languages, like Scratch or Alice.
I've heard of Scratch. Isn't that the one where you can kind of drag and drop blocks of code?
Yep, that's the one. And it's great because it lets you focus on logic and structure without having to worry about syntax.
So it's kind of like building with Legos, right? You're focused on what you're creating, not the technical details of how the bricks fit together.
Exactly. And it's a really fun and accessible way to start getting a feel for how different coding concepts work.
Cool. What about for someone who's like maybe a little intimidated by actually writing code? Are there other ways to start exploring those concepts?
Definitely. The article also mentions flowcharts. They're a great way to visually represent algorithms, kind of like a map of how different parts of a program interact.
Oh, yeah. I remember using flowcharts back in school.
Hmm.
It's amazing how helpful they are for like organizing your thoughts and breaking down a problem into smaller steps.
Right. And then there are also just good old-fashioned puzzles, logic puzzles, Sudoku, things like that. They're like a workout for your problem-solving muscles.
So we're training our brains to think like programmers, even when we're not actually coding. I like it.
Exactly. And then once you feel ready to actually dive into writing code, there are platforms like HackerRank and LeetCode, which have these coding challenges that focus on like algorithmic problem solving rather than memorizing syntax.
So it's a good way to put those problem-solving skills to the test or real coding scenario. Sounds challenging, but also super rewarding.
Oh, for sure. And hey, remember, you don't have to do this alone. There are tons of online communities and coding groups where you can connect with other learners and get support.
Collaboration is key. It's always good to have people you can bounce ideas off of and learn from. Okay, so we've talked about why syntax shouldn't be the first thing you learn when you're starting out with code, and we've explored some of the key concepts that you should focus on instead. But what about the benefits of this approach in the long run? Does this article talk about that at all?
It does, and you're not going to believe the amazing superpowers that await you if you embrace this concept-first approach. We'll uncover those incredible benefits right after the break.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about all the reasons why ditching the syntax-first approach to learning code can be a game changer. But now it's time to unveil the superpowers that await you on the other side.
Yeah, get ready for some serious coding awesomeness.
Okay, I'm excited. Hit me with superpower number one.
Adaptability. Like, think about it. The tech world is constantly changing. New languages, new frameworks. It's like a whirlwind of innovation. But when you understand the core concepts behind all of that, the logic, the problem-solving approaches, you can learn and adapt to these changes so much faster.
So it's like having a mental agility that lets you navigate all the craziness.
Exactly. You're not stuck in the syntax of just one specific language.
Mm.
You understand the big picture. Like, imagine you need to learn a new JavaScript framework for a project. Well, because you already understand concepts like functions, data structures, and control flow, you could pick up that new framework syntax way faster and start building amazing things right away.
Okay, that's pretty powerful. What's the next superpower on the list?
Problem solving, like with a capital P. When you really understand why code works the way it does, you become a much more effective problem solver. It's not just about fixing bugs. It's about seeing the big picture, identifying patterns, and coming up with innovative solutions.
It's like having X-ray vision for code, seeing right through to the core of the issue.
And honestly, that problem-solving skill set, It doesn't stop at code. It spills over into everything you do. You start thinking more analytically and strategically about everything. Suddenly, you're the go-to person for solving problems, whether it's debugging a website or figuring out the best way to organize a project.
So not just better coders, but better thinkers. I like it. What's next?
Okay, get ready for this one. Better code quality. It's a superpower that every developer secretly craves. Because when you understand the concepts, you just naturally write cleaner code. It's more efficient, more maintainable, and way less prone to those pesky bugs.
It's like having a master craftsman's touch. Your code isn't just functional, it's elegant and beautiful.
Exactly. And that makes everyone happy. Your team loves you because your code is easy to work with, and you love yourself because you're not spending hours trying to untangle messy code.
Win-win. Okay, so we've got adaptability, problem solving, code quality. There's got to be more.
Well, there's definitely more.
Yeah.
How about improved communication? Because when you understand the concepts, you can explain them to anyone. It doesn't matter if they're technical or not.
Oh, that's huge, especially in today's world where you're constantly collaborating with people from all sorts of different backgrounds. Being able to communicate effectively is a must-have skill.
It's like being a coding ambassador, bridging the gap between the tech world and everyone else. And that leads to better collaboration, better products, and just an overall smoother workflow.
Okay, last but not least, what's the final superpower that this concept-first approach unlocks?
The one that rules them all. Continuous learning. Because when you have that solid foundation of concepts, you're never satisfied. You're always hungry to learn more, to explore new technologies, to push the boundaries of what's possible.
It's like having an insatiable curiosity about how things work, always looking for ways to improve and innovate.
Exactly. You become a lifelong learner, always evolving, always growing.
These are some seriously impressive superpowers. It sounds like the benefits of this approach go way beyond just writing code. It's really about developing a mindset that embraces curiosity, critical thinking, and a deep understanding of how the world works.
And those are skills that will serve you well, no matter what path you choose in life.
Well said. And I think we've made a pretty compelling case for why everyone, even if you're just thinking about dipping your toes into the world of coding, should really consider embracing this concept-first approach.
Start with the why, and the how will follow. Trust me, your future coding self will thank you.
So, to all our listeners out there, we challenge you to think about a problem that you'd love to solve with code. Now, imagine yourself approaching that problem with a deep understanding of the concepts behind it. How would that change your approach? How would it empower you to create something truly incredible? And remember, there are amazing resources like Algocademy out there to guide you on this journey of learning and discovery. So embrace the power of concepts, dive deep into the world of coding, and who knows, maybe you'll discover a few superpowers of your own along the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep coding.